Behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed. For over 100 years, Carfin Grotto, situated in a small ex-mining village in the west of Scotland, has been an oasis of peace and prayer, a shrine dedicated to our Blessed Mother. Why Carfin? Cardinal Bourne of Westminster pondered this very question as he spoke to crowds of 50,000 at Carfin Grotto in 1924. It was a secret of Almighty God. It was God's doing, and it was His choice. No one could tell why our Lord has chosen Palestine for His country and the humble house of Nazareth for His home. Why had He chosen to be born in a stable? Why had He chosen an almost unknown town in the Pyrenees, which to reveal His will to a peasant and inspire honour towards His Immaculate? God had been pleased to set up this place, acting like a magnet to honour Himself and His Blessed Mother.
Grotto is just really part of who you are.
I come up here daily and it gives me great comfort.
I find it great. It's a really enlightening experience.
It's just a safe haven, the grotto. I just feel you're stepping in off the main road, you're going in, and as soon as you get through that gate, there's no sound to me. There is no outdoor sound to me. I get in there and it's silence, just the peace and tranquility.
But when people come and you hear them talking about the grotto and the saints and the relics, and it's a kind of magic again.
Well, I think it's very special because it gives a lovely centre for people to come and, you know, to pray and to celebrate our faith.
Because I find it's great for peace and quiet, contemplation and kind of prayer as well.
Just love up here. It's like a second home. And I feel so safe when I'm in here.
10 years here. Very, very enjoyable. I loved it. Loved every day of it.
And you feel at peace when you come here. You feel happy. You feel proud to be part of something like this, do you know what I mean?
It means a lot to me. I call it my home. It's always, no matter where you are, I consider it Carfin as my home.
So, just how did this small little town become host to what is now Scotland's national Marian shrine? The answer is in our roots, indeed, in the very soil of our country. Inspired by the good news of Christ, His birth, death and resurrection, many apostles of the faith spread His word throughout Europe. It was in these ancient lands that the seeds of Christianity were sown through Saints Ninian, Mungo and Columba from the 3rd century onwards. As Scotland formed into a nation state, so too did the faith flourish in these lands. Indeed, down the centuries, Catholicism was at the very heart of Scottish culture, education, healthcare and art. This was true too of Lanarkshire, where there was a network of small towns and hamlets, which still today attest to the presence of the medieval church in our land. On the very boundary of the grotto's grounds lie the ruins of a medieval church which lends its name to an area known as Chapel Now. This ancient sanctuary is now lost to the ground, rubble which testifies to the darkest of days when the faith was nearly extinguished from our land during the Reformation. The Catholic faith was banned, punishable by harsh penalties and even death. It seemed the faith was dead and buried. Yet it was from the earth that, during the Industrial Revolution, vast deposits of coal were discovered, leading to a massive expansion of mining operations in Lanarkshire, which would have a dramatic effect on local demographics. At this same time in Ireland in the 1840s, millions were fleeing the effects of the Great Famine and left their native lands to seek work, food and shelter for their families. Likewise, the remnants of the Catholic faithful in the Gaelic Highlands of Scotland were cleared from their lands, and they headed in great numbers to the Central Belt, bringing their faith with them. In the small town of Carfin, industries such as coal mining and brickmaking led to an influx of migrant Irish workers who were in need of pastoral care. This fell to the Reverend John Mackay of the Wisha Mission, who, seeing the plight of the Catholic children lacking education, sought to build a school in 1861. He was refused on the grounds it taught superstition and damning delusion. Despite this, Father Mackay decided a mass centre was needed, and in 1862 he established this in the house of the O'Neill family, not far from the grotto grounds today. The following year, a chapel school was erected, helped by the generous donations of some local Protestants. As the Catholic population grew, so too did demand for a permanent, larger church on the site, and on the 2nd of July 1882, Archbishop Eyre of Glasgow solemnly blessed the new Gothic-style church of St Francis Xavier, Carfin. Over the course of the next few decades, the parish would continue to flourish under the guidance of successive parish priests, ministering to a growing flock as the town's numbers grew with more migration, and at the turn of the new century particularly a large number from Lithuania. In 1915, God's providence led to Father Thomas Taylor being appointed parish priest of St Francis Xavier's Carfin. Thomas Nimmo Taylor was born in Greenock on the 16th of December 1873. The first child of middle-class parents James Taylor, a headmaster of the local school, and Roseanne Nimmo. The Taylor family fortune was sustained by weaving. Thomas's baptism took place with an unusual delay on the 4th of January, but this did not disturb Taylor in later life because it happily coincided with St Therese of Lisieux's first anniversary of baptism. Soon after his birth, his brother Henry John was born, followed by Alexander, then his sister Roseanne, who sadly died before her first birthday, and a final brother called James Bede. 3 of the Taylor brothers became priests, and Henry John, the only sibling to marry, would later be the father of a priest himself. The Taylors were a devout Catholic family. Thomas was educated at the nearby Franciscan convent school and later at St Aloysius College in Glasgow. It was at this time that signs of his piety and vocation were growing. He was more reserved and studious, different to those around him. His father's diaries speak more of the pranks of his brother Alex, with no reference to Thomas. He was known as Tommy Taylor, the student who never broke a rule, and was nicknamed by his fellow students Pious Tommy. His intellect was noticed, and he was encouraged by a Jesuit priest to apply for seminary at St Mary's, Blair's, where he eventually entered in 1889. Due to poor health in 1891, it was thought better that he should be transferred to seminary in Saint-Sulpice, France, and then Issy. With his studies in France, this allowed the young seminarian to visit Lourdes for the first time in 1893. The young Taylor was drawn again back to Lourdes in 1894, where he met and questioned St Bernadette's brother, as well as Madame Abadie, who, as a young girl, accompanied St Bernadette on the day of the first apparition in Lourdes. Lourdes had a tremendous effect on Taylor. He wrote, "The hushed crowd of worshippers and the statue of our Queen may never be forgotten. May this year of the diaconate and the priesthood be blessed by the Sacred Heart. O my God, make me a holy priest." He was ordained a priest in June 1897, the same year that St. Therese entered into eternal life. He first served as a curate in St. Patrick's, Dumbarton. In 1900, he became a lecturer at St. Peter's College, Bearsden. It was during this time, in 1901, he was given an abridged translation of The Story of a Soul, the life of St. Therese, by a friend, Father Bernard Lynch, which profoundly inspired him. He contacted the Mother Prioress of the Lisieux Carmel and St. Therese sisters, suggesting her cause for sainthood be introduced. He also requested copies of the original autobiography and distributed these widely. He wrote at the time, "The next step was the publication of pictures and leaflets. These were distributed throughout the English-speaking world." He was noted as the first pilgrim from Britain to visit St. Therese's grave, which at that time was so unknown, a local priest in Lisieux, upon being asked directions, did not know where it was. It was this same year that he wrote a leaflet on St. Therese's life, selling 100,000 copies, which led to the funding of his full-length translation of The Story of a Soul, which appeared in 1912. Aside from his interest in St. Therese, he also maintained his connection to Lourdes. Whilst lecturing in Bearsden, he published a book entitled Lourdes and its Miracles, which, along with a series of lectures, helped to make Lourdes better known in Scotland. On Friday 9th July 1915, he was appointed parish priest of St. Francis Xavier Carfin. The seeds of the idea to begin the construction of Carfin Grotto began following a parish group visit to Lourdes in 1920, with Father Taylor as part of the Scottish National Pilgrimage there.
My suspicion is that Taylor's motivations were general. In other words, they were varied and probably complex. I think the fundamental motivation was spiritual, and indeed an attempt to ensure through mariolatry, in other words, through the appeal of the Virgin Mary and what had happened in Lourdes, to establish a much stronger spirituality among his people.
Inspired by the example of the Belgian replica of Lourdes Grotto at Oustaker, Father Taylor would return to Carfin with a plan to construct a small replica of the Lourdes Grotto at Carfin. The site chosen was opposite the parish church on an empty acre of ground purchased by the parish 12 years earlier.
One of the things that I admire most about the beginnings of the grotto, and the Papal Nuncio mentioned this in his Mass celebrating the grotto centenary, was how this was the inspiration of one man, a parish priest. Our Lady never appeared here, so unlike Fatima and Lourdes and La Salette and all those different places, there was no vision of Our Lady here in the grotto at Carfin. Canon Taylor, it was his inspiration as a great man of God and a great shepherd, a true pastor, that he wanted his parishioners to experience what he had experienced and people who were lucky enough to have made the pilgrimage to Lourdes had experienced.
On Sunday, September 19th, 1920, the first sod was cut by the oldest miner in the village, Andy O'Donnell, and the site blessed. There was wide enthusiasm in the parish for the new venture, not least due to the difficult economic times experienced by the miners who, through strikes and unemployment, were left idle.
In the early 1920s, overwhelmingly, the Catholic people of Lanarkshire belonged to the working classes. There were very few in what you might call the professional or business groups indeed at that time. And the difficulty was the community was recovering from the great catastrophe of World War I. In 1919-1920, the beginnings of the long drawn out trauma of economic depression and unemployment, and to some extent also trade union conflict, began to hit the area.
Father Taylor, concerned for their spiritual welfare as well as their physical condition, encouraged the men to devote themselves to this task. As the word spread, men offered their services from Cleland, Newart Hill, New Stevenson, Moss End and surrounding villages.
It's great the way it was built, from it came from just the ordinary men of the village and surrounding villages that all helped in the building of it.
Because at that time there used to be a wee village down between Carfin and Grotto, and that was the pits down there, and then they all closed down, so they were brought up to Carfin.
It's only God's work that could have had that done. His foresight, and then the dedication of the locals, obviously, and the great faith that the people had.
The people round about could never have afforded to go to Lourdes, because I mean that took them all the time to go to Glasgow, you know, and he decided to make the Lourdes Grotto and to give the men work. That was taking them out and making them, you know, giving them something to do with their lives. And I remember my daddy saying that they weren't paid for doing it, you know, but he used to give them 5 woodbine every Friday. That was their pay, 5 woodbine.
The work was difficult, and as winter 1921 began and conditions on the site worsened, the number of volunteers dropped away until only one man remained. Father Taylor, concerned that his project would not reach a happy conclusion, sought the intercession of St. Therese, begging her intercession in a novena and placing a relic of her on the boundary of the site. The next week, the volunteers returned and the work once again was on track for completion for the summer of 1922.
How they men built all that, it was just God's hands, because none of them they were just all ordinary men, you know.
On Rosary Sunday, October 1st, 1922, which coincided with the silver jubilee of the little flower St. Therese of Lisieux, the Carfin Lourdes shrine was opened and blessed by Father Taylor in front of 2,000 faithful, along with his curate, Father John Murphy, Father Conway, Father Doyle and Fathers Brown and Petrauskas from Holy Family Moss End. Lourdes water was mixed with the artificial spring connected to the water mains set up at the grotto in imitation of that in Lourdes. The typical weather for a Scottish October gave way to a moment of bright sunshine that lit up the statue at the moment of its blessing.
And this extraordinary development at Carfin was almost like a kind of beacon of spiritual light in that milieu of darkness. The 1920s was a growth period for the Catholic community, not simply in Lanarkshire but elsewhere in Scotland, of a new intensity of devotion.
The work of Father Taylor in the promotion of St. Therese growing devotion among Scottish Catholics and the wider English-speaking world soon began to blossom, and she was beatified in Rome on April 29th, 1923. Father Taylor, as one of her witnesses, attended the event. On return from Rome, Father Taylor installed a small statue of the Blessed Therese in the grotto to mark the occasion. Some concerns were raised that the presence of this new statue would detract the pilgrims' focus from Our Lady. However, Father Taylor, whilst on pilgrimage to the Lisieux Carmel in 1923, spoke to Mother Agnes, the sister of St. Therese, about these objections. Mother Agnes assured Father Taylor that her saintly sister, who loved her Heavenly Mother, would not rob Our Lady of her glory. "Keep her statue in the grotto," she insisted. "We shall ask Therese to draw souls to Carfin and so prove how she loves Our Lady." And so the little flower did indeed answer those prayers, for almost immediately crowds began to increase at the grotto. Every Sunday thousands gathered, spilling out onto the streets. Word of the grotto would spread beyond the local area, as claims of cures abounded by those who had drunk from the springs there. The first claim of a significant cure was from a parishioner, a Mrs. Doyle, who suffered from a varicose ulcer and was immobile for 3 years. Mrs. Doyle said her rosary and applied the Carfin water for 15 days, after which she was entirely healed and the ulcer gone. She walked a mile to the grotto to announce her recovery. Her medical attendant backed up her story. This happened about the Feast of the Immaculate Conception in 1922. A further cure of a Carfin Protestant in the summer of 1923 aroused greater interest, and as more were healed, word spread, and many converted to the faith, including a non-Catholic doctor who himself was cured at the shrine. Unknown to many at the time, a young Edinburgh girl by the name of Margaret Sinclair spent an hour praying at the grotto before Our Lady on July 4th. She soon after entered religious life, and then her eternal life. Her intercession is still held dear by Scottish Catholics to this day. On the Feast of the Assumption, 1923, 50,000 pilgrims queued for hours to drink of the water. Father Taylor always insisted that any miracle or cure came from faith, prayer and penance, and not the water itself. Such was the volume of pilgrims that Archbishop Mackintosh of Glasgow agreed to the extension of the grotto. Father Taylor purchased a further 5 acres of land. The Archbishop also approved the construction of a new and larger Lourdes Institute behind the grotto. Once again, local men answered the call, and work to extend the grotto began on 21st January, with the hope of completion on Easter Monday of that same year. 100 workers, the vast majority Cleland men, took on the task of learning new skills such as landscape gardening, plumbing and stone masonry. They worked through the night by carbide lamps to finish the extension in time. Attention soon turned to the preparations for the great Eucharistic procession of Corpus Christi around Carfin village on the 22nd of June 1924. Permission for the previous 2 processions were granted by the local authority, but this year, a few days before the spectacle began, the police superintendent informed Father Taylor that the local MP, one Hugh Ferguson, had invoked an obsolete Act of 1829, questioning the legality of the procession.
The ban, or the attempted ban, came from Hugh Ferguson, who was standing. He didn't stand for any particular party. He stood on behalf of the Orange Order. So that was, if you like, symbolic of the kind of attitudes that were starting to prevail. I mean, the Catholic Irish, or the Scoto-Irish as they started to be called, were never loved by their Protestant neighbours, but there really had not been very much in the way of sectarian, the outburst of militant sectarian attitudes. That began to change after the war, and particularly from about 1920, 1921. I mean, the great symbol of that new growth in anti-Catholicism, and especially anti-Irish racism, was the publication by the Church of Scotland in 1924 of their pamphlet, The Menace of the Irish Race to Our Scottish Nationality. It's very important you remember the word race in that, because it wasn't necessarily only anti-Catholicism that was beginning to build up. It was anti-Irish racism in that particular period.
The law stated that clerics processing in their vestments could be heavily fined or imprisoned. Therefore, the procession of 30,000 Catholics went ahead inside the grotto only, on the advice of the Archdiocese. Shortly after, the issue was raised and debated in Westminster, and, as a result, almost the last remaining penal laws against Catholics would be repealed in the United Kingdom in 1926, thanks to this unfortunate event. A month later, the sadness surrounding the Corpus Christi controversy gave way to joy as the grotto and Scotland welcomed a visit from a cardinal for the first time in several decades. 50,000 turned up to hear from Cardinal Bourne of Westminster, who preached on the little way of the Blessed Therese. People came to the grotto in humble supplication to Mary for their needs and the desires of themselves and their friends. Carfin was the gathering place of faithful hearts. It was inspired by the little flower of Jesus, one raised up in these latter years to show us the way to honour and trust in God. St. Therese was canonised in 1925, and in May of that year, money was raised for a new shrine in her honour. Father Taylor carefully instructed the design of the marble statue with the approval of St. Therese's sisters. The little sisters there at Carmel declared that Carfin and Les Yeux are but one. She was, from then, officially recognised as a patroness of the grotto. In subsequent years, Little Flower Sunday grew in prominence with the blessing of roses, a highlight of the day. In 1925, Father Taylor unveiled his hopes of constructing a major votive basilica dedicated to Our Lady and St. Therese on the site behind Carfin Grotto, he named Mary's Now. We see that his plans, designed by the architect Reginald Fairley, were approved by the Archbishop of the time in a letter of Father Taylor to the Mother Prioress of the Carmel at Kirkintilloch in 1924. The attitude of His Grace is generally wonderful. He has readily, though provisionally, assented to a purchase of from 30 to 40 acres, including the site of a medieval chapel, dedication unknown to me, to the erection of a votive chapel to seat 3,000, with a courtyard in front for 20,000, and to the extension of the grotto, which should contain 100,000 people. That is enough to show you my need of light from the Holy Ghost to strengthen my very feeble faculties of grace and strength, to carry on the work of the material and spiritual sides of the shrine. Whom am I? God help me. Sadly, with the depression of the 1930s and the start of a war, plans for this basilica and the major building projects were abandoned. A friend of Father Taylor's from St. Peter's College, Monsignor Clace, suggested that additional saints' shrines be built so that the numbers visiting the grotto might be able to make a day of it. Father Taylor acted upon this suggestion and, after some thought, purchased a further field towards the chapel now site in 1926. At the same time, the numbers were boosted by the opening of the Grotto Halt, which meant that pilgrims could arrive by train directly at the Grotto gates.
The funniest thing I remember was your mammy had all you decked out in your Sunday clothes, your shiny face, your haircut, and on the train was the old steam train. And it was last Sunday when I was passing through, it clicked in my mind. I says, oh my God, if I only can remember coming off the train with our faces all black, we soot off the trains and teachers were washing your face. And that was my earliest remember of Carfin Grotto.
The ground once again needed the important work of Grotto volunteers to make it suitable for the new shrines. Work such as draining off the land, levelling the terrain. At this time, the 100 workmen excavated Our Lady's Lake in the lower grotto, which at its centre featured Stella Maris.
We always would head down to the Stella Maris, the Star of the Sea, where it was the islet where now stands the glass chapel.
There had been lakes there with a sort of bridge and an island, and on that island was a statue of Our Lady, Star of the Sea, which the Canon kind of adopted as Our Lady of Carfin.
As a young boy, I remember being quite mesmerised by this. And I'm kind of disappointed that that's been taken away.
And of course, as kids, you'd be looking in the pond to see if there was tadpoles. That's what you did, you were children.
People used to throw the money in, then you see the kids getting in at night. I'm not saying I didn't take it all, just threw a tanner or something. That was a common thing.
There was no rest for Father Taylor's workers as they created landscape and pathways to guide the pilgrims round the new shrines, such as the impressive Calvary Shrine and the statue of Christ the King, which overlooked the Grotto domain from Mary's Now. Sadly, in 1928, one of the young volunteers, a 19-year-old Thomas Cullion, died in a tragic accident whilst working on the roof of the new Lourdes Institute.
My uncle was an apprentice plater, and he did a lot of work with Grotto himself for the Canon Taylor. And the story is that he just arrived home from work, and the Canon had sent for him to come down and do some work in the Lourdes Hall. So he just sat down at his dinner and he says, well, I'll just go keep it warm for you, Mum, you know. And she said, as mothers do say, you know, you need to have your dinner. And he apparently just patted her and said, I'll see you in a minute. Not for long. And next word she got was that he was in the Royal Infirmary in Glasgow. There used to be a very large cross stood at the top, obviously in the roof of the Lourdes Hall. And it wasn't repaired or whatever, put in place. And he was, Canon had asked him to do this. So he went up and apparently slipped after he done the cross, well, was in the process of doing the cross. And I always remember that the cross had a slight tilt in it. And it was one of the local priests of the time said, well, that'll be a memory to Thomas. And Thomas was only 19 years of age, and he died within the day.
The working legacy of young Thomas continued in the volunteers who remained. Led by hard-working foreman Hugh Devlin, the lower part of the grotto was levelled and stairs added for access. Father Taylor had no further plans at this point to install extra shrines, but at the insistence of a Govan lady who wished her life savings to be given for the erection of a statue to St Anthony, he changed his mind. This in turn inspired the tertiaries of St Francis to donate a statue of their patron, and from there saw the construction of the impressive Mount Assisi with the adjacent Bethlehem Cave and the Chapel of the Angels, both associated with St Francis. On the 22nd of September 1929, the Franciscans held their first rally and blessed the shrine before a crowd of thousands. Whilst workers were busy on the lower grotto, in the upper section, shrines to St Margaret and St Patrick were unveiled. In 1930, the honour of unveiling St Patrick's statue fell to Belfast MP Joseph Devlin. 4 years later, the impressive Irish Mass Rock was unveiled, a generous gift from a Protestant landowner in Rathfriland in County Down. One of the other gifts from Ireland in this decade was the founding of the Legion of Mary in Carfin. The Legion was founded earlier by an Irish layman, Frank Duff. The Legionnaires were at the forefront of preparing hospitality on big grotto days. Father Taylor had a keen devotion to relics, and one of his goals was to make this a feature of the spirituality of the grotto by restoring a practice that was lost in Scotland during the Reformation. Adjacent to the old parish church, Father Taylor enshrined his vast collection in an eloquent chapel, one of the largest collections of relics in the world, featuring saints from every age and continent. Featured in the centre of this chapel is the Carfin missionary monstrance, crafted by Monsieur Dupont and blessed by Pope Pius XI in 1934. Father Taylor wrote, "The monstrance was made possible by the innumerable clients of the Carfin Lourdes Grotto, none of them wealthy, some of them in actual want, who parted with their jewels and long treasured gold pieces in order that the tribute to the Eucharistic King might be worthy and complete. The blessed gold of the wedding rings was reserved for the lunettes, the part that contains the host. The following year, a processional Blessed Sacrament canopy was commissioned, designed again by Dupont and carved by Albrecht de Haave. As he finished each carved panel, he carried them under his arm on the 6-mile walk to Bruges. Madame Dupont painted the tulip wood carvings. The first procession of the relics in the grotto took place on Easter Monday on the 9th of April 1928, and each progressive year it took on greater grandeur and size. On Corpus Christi Sunday 1937, the grotto welcomed one of its most esteemed guests, Monsignor Fulton Sheen, who witnessed the pageantry and solemnity of the Corpus Christi procession in the grotto. Father Taylor and the Venerable Fulton Sheen were very good friends. The later Archbishop Fulton Sheen visited Father Taylor many times at Carfin. He wrote to Susan McGee, the author of Father Taylor's biography, "I visited Father Taylor several times at Carfin. The first time I visited, he asked me to preach a sermon in honour of the little flower at this shrine, which was opposite the church of Carfin. I told him I would talk about the Blessed Mother. He insisted on the little flower. We hit upon a compromise. It was this. I would begin by telling a humorous incident about the Blessed Mother and the little flower. If the audience laughed, I would talk on the Blessed Mother. If they did not laugh, I would talk on the little flower. The story I told was something that actually happened in Long Beach, California. In this particular church, there were altars immediately adjoining one another, one of the little flower and the other of the Blessed Mother. In an earthquake, the statue of the little flower fell into the arms of the Blessed Mother unharmed. I said, if in times of trouble the little flower goes to the Blessed Mother, why should we go to anyone else? I need not tell you that I spoke about the Blessed Mother. Father Taylor was well connected and travelled extensively, promoting Lourdes, the Little Flower, and Carfin. He even reached the White House in 1926 whilst touring, and he presented a copy of his biography of the Little Flower to President Calvin Coolidge. His Catholic connections ranged from a countless number of people such as Frank Duff, the founder of the Legion of Mary, Hilaire Belloc, the English writer, the servant of God, Father Willie Doyle, as well as frequent communications with the now venerable Mother Angeline, who grew up in Carfin and Moss End before founding an order of Carmelites for the aged and infirm across the US. In 1937, Father Taylor was honoured as a Canon of the Archdiocese of Glasgow. Sadly, with the advent of war in Europe in 1939, many of the larger scale events at Carfin Grotto were curtailed, mainly due to transport issues.
There was an army based in Carfin in the Jenny Lynn. The RASC they were over in the Jenny Lynn, which is just over at wherever Craig, over that way. And also they had a base. They used a warehouse in Green Stevenson Road, but it was the RASC were based over there. And they had a big searchlight which we could see sometimes.
The thing I remember most about that was the practices we had in school for air raids, where we used to have to run out to the little houses round about. They took so many of us while the air raid was on.
The searchlights were used for the air raids, and we could watch from our window where we lived, we could watch the Blitz at Clyde Bank. We could see the effects of it from where we lived.
And going to school with your gas mask over your shoulder and all of that. One of the things, and we've been talking about it in the car coming up, praying for Russia. That was the Canon's big thing. And I remember Douglas Hyde, who became a convert and prayed for the conversion of Russia all the time. But the Canon, too, was always praying for the conversion of Russia.
Small groups and pilgrims continued to attend throughout, including members of the armed forces from the United States, Australia, New Zealand and Goa, who were stationed nearby during the war.
The Goanese, it was during the war, and of course they landed in the ships in Glasgow. And of course it was a very Catholic, Goa was a Catholic country. And my father's cousin, Jimmy Callaghan, he was instrumental in actually inviting the Goanese sailors to come out to Carfin because of the grotto. So the one, he was called Gomez and his friend always came to our house because they came out every time they docked. It wasn't always the same ones, but he was an officer. And the first time I'd ever seen a banana, a real banana, was when Gomez brought one out. My sister, just older than me, she had rheumatic fever, and it was for Rose to get this real banana because the ones we got were just shriveled up, dehydrated bananas, you know.
First communion, well, again it was in the war. The war had started and we were all thrilled to bits. We were taken, after the first communion, we were taken into the Little Flower Hall and the table was all set for us. And believe it or not, there was an orange on the table. The only fruit we had was fruit that was grown in this country. So to get an orange was really something special.
The soldiers, the French soldiers were over here, based over here, and they came here on one of the days that, I don't know whether it was, what day, you know, if it was a special day or not, but they appeared, they marched in the procession, and so did the Polish soldiers.
They used to walk down to church on a Sunday. There was a group of them would walk down to church on a Sunday.
Notably, 2 pilgrimages by Allied soldiers were to leave a lasting impression on the villagers of Carfin. In May 1940, a French battalion arrived at short notice, and Canon Taylor appealed locally for food, which was duly answered. The caterers in the Lourdes Institute catered for 500 French soldiers who planned to visit the grotto to consecrate their battalion to Our Lady and St. Therese. There was better preparation in September 1940 for 400 Polish soldiers who were led by Bishop Gawlina, a general and 2 colonels and their choir. In 1945, peace returned to Europe, and the village of Carfin experienced a boost in numbers due to the baby boomers, with pilgrims too visiting in thanksgiving for the return of peace and to seek solace for the loss of their loved ones. The numbers rebounded to pre-war levels with the celebration of the Silver Jubilee of the Grotto in 1947. The sunken garden extension to the grotto, which was started in 1938 but halted by the outbreak of war, was completed in the following years. The stonework used was reclaimed from Cadsall Parish Church and the old St Francis Xavier School. Canon Taylor referred to the walkway, which is now the Stations of the Cross, as the Miracle Road because of various landslips, meaning the pathway could not be completed. Taylor, trusting in St Therese, buried a relic of the saint, and the pathway was successfully built up, creating the sunken garden. To this was added the bas-relief of the 7 Sorrows of Our Lady, and at the opposite end, the Holy House of Nazareth was constructed, built as a replica of the House of Loreto, following the instructions of the Bishop of Loreto. As the 1950s arrived, Canon Taylor, despite the effects of ageing, continued to preach the message of Lourdes and Fatima, penance, prayer, the Mass and the Rosary.
The Canon played a big part in our lives. Everybody spoke about the Canon, and we only just called him. He was the Canon. I was very, very lucky to receive my first Holy Communion from the Canon, and I think we were probably maybe about, if not, I don't think we were the last, but maybe the second or third last year of the Canon being able to give us Holy Communion. So I got my Holy Communion from the Canon. I've got a beautiful photograph of the class with the Canon and Father Brosnan and Father Comerford, who were the curates in the parish at that time.
My mother, God rest her, they thought she had cancer, they wrote, and she came up and he gave her a blessing with his relic. And he said to her, when you're going about doing your work, Margaret, just keep saying, little flower in this hour, help me, little flower in this hour, pray for me. He says, that's all you have to say, you don't say it into yourself, just keep saying away at it. He says, she'll help you. And then she get all clear. So.
I took pneumonia, and this would be about the 1950s. I was took into Motherwell Hospital, and I was in there, and when they x-rayed me, I had a spot of TB in my right lung. My mother worked in the mill at the time, and she went straight for the mill, no dinner, straight to here for the novena, to the grotto, and she done a novena that I wouldn't need an operation. Without fail, she done this novena, and Canon Taylor seen her and was talking to her. And of course she told them what she was doing the novena for, and he says, Mrs Brown, don't you worry, he says, your daughter will never need an operation. And they gave me this AP, they collapsed the lung, and it was the air that I used instead of using the lung. So the lung rested and it healed. Of all that man to thank. And he wrote the book about the little flower, and he gave my mother the book for me, and he wrote on it to Anne-Marie. It was through Canon Taylor and the little flower, the long-heeled.
I wasn't feeling very well, and I remember lying down on the couch and everything kind of going black and everything, and it was, they called it infantile paralysis then. And then I was taken into hospital, and the Canon used to come down every night and say his prayers with me. And then he came down one night and he laid his hands on me. We said our prayers in the room. And I can just remember him. And then he gave me a wee kiss on the cheek, and he blessed me. And Mama said to my mammy, that was me. You know, he says, Mummy says, we'll see you tomorrow, Canon. And he says, no, that's me. He says, what do you miss most? And I says, riding my bike. He says, well, that's fine then, you'll ride your bike again. But I couldn't walk, but I could ride the bike.
Canon was very unworldly in as far as being involved in anything. Bing Crosby was coming to play golf in St Andrews, and they had heard of Carfin. I don't know whether it was through Bishop Fulton Sheen or not, but anyway, contacted the Canon wanting to visit Carfin. So the Canon, Mary discovered this letter months and months after Bing Crosby had been and gone, and said, Mary said to him, Canon, what did you know? Did you not do anything about this letter? And he said, why, what? She said, from Bing Crosby. He said, who's Bing Crosby?
We're passing the old chapel one night, and unfortunately, I looked up and I saw the lights in the church. And I thought, oh, this is strange. I must look in. Is there a service going on? And when I looked in, it was only the Canon himself and this lady saying the rosary. And he happened to look round and he said, child, would you like to join us? And I said, yes, I would. I'd be privileged. So we started saying the rosary. We must have said about 15 decades. And I don't know whether it was the maid or the lady of the house came out and said, excuse me, but Canon, you're wanted on the phone. And he excused himself. He went away. And an hour later, he asked, before he went away, I said, just continue saying the rosary. And we waited and waited. An hour passed, an hour and a half passed. And by this time, we were getting married. This lady, I didn't know her much, but anyway, the Canon came in. Oh, he said, he's still here. He said, what decade are you at? And this must have been about 10 o'clock. We told him. So we finished the rosary, and then he says, I wonder if you'd do me a favour, child. Would you take this lady down the road? I said, yes, I would. Where does she stay? Cleacombe in. By this time, we saying the rosary, I was a bit exhausted. So I had to walk, promise the Canon, I had to take this lady down. And it was a good experience, a good memory of saying the rosary with the Canon.
People used to come and work with the Canon, people from different places. So we always had visitors. He used to ring my mother and say, could he send so-and-so up? And my mother looked after them. And he came up himself one evening, and my mother and father had just gone out to an aunt. And so the three of us in the family were at home, and there was a piano in the living room. And the Canon said, can you play the piano? And we didn't play very well, but we were just learning. And he asked us to play, and we did. And then he sat down and played most beautifully on the piano, and that was an absolute revelation to me.
Canon always had an imperial. He always had mints in his mouth, and he would give you mints, you know.
So he would say, if you can tell me how many red buttons are, you get an imperial. We never got it right, but we always got the imperial. But he was such a lovely man.
they started building the Ravenscraig, and we're coming up, and the noise was hanging, and he said to me, "What's that noise? I hear it at night when I'm in the grotto, and it's like, oh, it's a terrible noise going on all night." And I says, Monsignor, I says, they're building a big steelwork. Oh no, and will my statues be all dirtied? Well, we've got a lot of dust coming out. I says, they will be. All right, I know where to come to get somebody to clean my statues.
Still, as ever, motivated to build up his grotto, he organised the last of the 2 shrines he would be involved with, which, fittingly, were associated with themes of his priesthood, Marian and Eucharistic. The first was that of Our Lady of Fatima, featuring also statues of the 3 seers, Sister Lucy dos Santos, the surviving seer of the apparitions, personally approved the designs, which arrived just in time for the end of the Marian year of 1954, after difficulties in transportation.
I remember as a very young girl going to Carfin with my mother and my father and my siblings. We lived in Musha, and there really wasn't a bus that would take you to Carfin. I remember the crowds, and it was quite daunting at times because everybody was jammed-packed in together.
I wouldn't have been able to put it into words when I was a wee boy, but the sense was there of, this is a great outfit I belong to.
I can also recall the martial ranks of schools, not simply in Lanarkshire, but from out Scotland, who were bussed in.
The biggest one I remember was 1948, when there were so many in the crowd that we couldn't have a procession. All that it could process was the statues and the shrines that it carried out from the reliquary, and they were the only ones that could go around the grotto. After that, the congregation had just to stand and line up in the main part of the shrine.
My aunt, who stayed down below, she would open up her house, as many of the parishioners in Carfin did on the big days, and they would provide hospitality for people from all over.
All the houses had signs up, keys, because there was no place for people. There was only one, there's a tea room underneath the old Lourdes Hall, but it wasn't big enough. It maybe held about 80 people. But all the people in the village, on the main street there, they had all notices up, keys, so people could go and get a cup of tea and a cake or a sandwich, whatever they made up.
I remember my daddy used to bring my mummy people down from the grotto. My mummy said, what's there nearly bringing down? Who's he bringing down the day? And he used to come down after the processions, and he always had people with him. And my mummy would give them their food and make dinner and that for them, you know.
Taylor's final installation would be in 1955 of Pope St. Pius X, the Pope known for his fostering of devotion to the Eucharist. In 1957, Monsignor Taylor celebrated his Diamond Jubilee by travelling for his final journey to Lourdes. On his return to Carfin, he was greeted with huge crowds which thronged the streets in a carnival atmosphere, thanking him for his 42 years of pastoral care of his flock.
And I remember when the Canon went in his Diamond Jubilee, we all to learn, if you remember the song, when he was coming on, welcome, welcome, Canon Taylor, welcome, welcome, now you're home. All our trials and tears are over. And that this was, we were all taught so that when he arrived back in Carfin.
As the excitement dampened down, Monsignor Taylor's eyesight continued to worsen, and it became increasingly difficult for him to read the Mass prayers.
With me being an altar boy as well, we used to, in his latter years, he was almost blind. So he said, James, you need to help me. So I used to literally stand right beside him. And then, the print was that size, it was really massive. And then he would say, when he turned the pages, and then latterly he couldn't say much.
It led to his frustration in accepting that, with his diminishing mobility but an active mind, he could no longer do what he could as a young priest in the 20s and 30s. His curates took on greater roles in running the grotto, and in particular also the care of the Monsignor, who had a habit of trying to cross the busy Newark Hill Road to visit and inspect his grotto. Eventually, he could no longer run the parish due to his declining health, and he retired as parish priest of St Francis Xavier in 1961. It was revealed that prayers and advice were sought from Padre Pio via writing about whether the Monsignor would be able to retire in the grotto. Padre Pio assured of his prayers and also that, whatever the decision, loyalty to the bishop must be given. Thankfully, Bishop Scanlon permitted the Monsignor to remain in Carfin after retirement. Taylor's public appearances were becoming more seldom, but he did rally for the 1962 centenary celebrations of the parish. The highlight of the year was a visit from his friend, the exiled Cardinal Tian of Beijing, which lifted his spirits.
It was a Chinese cardinal I came to visit, but it was a big thing then, particularly coming from China, and a cardinal.
Monsignor Taylor participated in his final public procession on the 9th December 1962, when he led the procession around the village from a car. 2 days later, he would celebrate his last public Mass on Tuesday the 11th December. In the following months, he became more detached from this world. He talked about his death and about not being afraid to die. His greater concern was for his curates and nurses for looking after a cross old man. Yet he retained his quick wit. When one of the sisters who nursed him asked what the little flower would do when she learned he was coming, he chuckled and replied instantly, "She'll drop everything and come running to meet me." Monsignor Taylor slipped in and out of consciousness in the last days of his life. He suffered much in his final years, but accepted this. As he says, "Now that I am no longer able for the work of the missions, I will offer my suffering for them." A curious incident is reported by one of the sisters in his care. One morning, as normal, she brought Monsignor his daily porridge on a tray and left it on his lap as he lay in bed. She left the room briefly, and upon her return within minutes, she noted the porridge eaten and the tray on the table at the opposite side of the room. Monsignor then uttered, "It was my mother who did this for me. She moved the tray." Monsignor Taylor passed into eternal life after 8 p.m. on the 1st of December 1963. Bells tolled mournfully across the grotto at 8:30 to let the parishioners know that the Monsignor had died.
Sad, because it was like Carfin had lost one of their own, you know what I mean?
It was awful. I mean, it really was. It was, you just couldn't take it in because you thought he was going to be there forever.
It was sad, but that was... but most people expect, because he was very old, and it was not a surprise.
At 10 p.m. that night, the BBC News at 10 announced his death on television. Fulton Sheen wrote, "Father Taylor was one of the most spiritual priests I have ever known. It was he who brought to the English-speaking public the life of St Therese and also fostered her devotion in Scotland." His coffin was processed around the grotto which he had built, carried by the parishioners who were under his spiritual care. On Thursday morning, the 4th of December, his cortege moved slowly through the streets of Carfin, accompanied by hundreds, to Our Lady of Good Aid Cathedral in Motherwell.
The Mass was in the cathedral, and it was obviously packed. But he was the very first, I think I must have been, I don't know, about 10 or 11, maybe a wee bit older. But that was the first dead body I had seen. They lay in state in the chapel, and the chapel was absolutely packed.
Monsignor Conroy was the celebrant, as Bishop Scanlon was still attending the meetings of the Second Vatican Council in Rome. All cross-sections of the Church in Scotland, across all dioceses, were represented, and the streets were lined with mourners. Monsignor Hamilton preached the panegyric with the words, "There lies here before the altar the mortal remains of one of our best known and most beloved priests. He was indeed a great priest, great not merely because of the wonderful things he accomplished, but because he was the embodiment of fully priestly dedication." It was Monsignor Taylor's express last wish and testament that he should be buried in his grotto before the Rosary Shrine of St Dominic. But this request was not fulfilled, and he was buried in the priest's plot at St Patrick's, New Stevenson.
He was a session canonised and buried in here.
The canon was exceptional. It didn't matter what he'd done or how he flighted or how he pointed us. He was just a great person.
Nor did the Monsignor live to see the realisation of his dream of a larger new church for the grotto. This would be a task for his successor. The daunting task of filling the shoes of Monsignor Taylor fell to Canon George Mullen, who was appointed parish priest of St Francis Xavier and guardian of the grotto on the 2nd of April 1965. He was tasked by the new Bishop of Motherwell, Francis Thompson, to construct a new church within the grotto precinct as soon as possible. It was hoped that this new parish church would be completed by 1972, the Golden Jubilee of the grotto, but it took until 1973 for its completion. The former parish church premises were acquired in July 1973 by the Holy Ghost Fathers. The new order extended the presbytery to include an oratory and additional accommodation, as well as the demolition of the original parish church. The original relic chapel was moved to a smaller space in the grotto at this time, and many of the treasures were packed away out of public view and into storage. Canon Mullen continued his predecessor's legacy of careful thought for the grotto by installing 2 new shrines to Scottish saints: a large marble statue of St Andrew, patron of Scotland, and later in 1981, following his canonisation in 1978, a beautiful marble shrine to the Scottish Jesuit martyr St John Ogilvie. At this time, during the height of Cold War tensions, new feelings of patriotism towards their homelands saw the diaspora of Eastern European nations construct their own shrines in the grotto as a focus of their pilgrimage and prayer for their homeland. 1977 saw the Ukrainians erect a black marble triptych installed in the lower grotto to commemorate their exodus from their homeland. And the Lithuanians extended their previous smaller shrine too, to mark their continued loyalty to the grotto by adding a large cross and later a shrine to Our Lady of the Dawn Gate in Vilnius.
With great pleasure they built the first shrine was Our Lady of the Dawn Gate, and then after that, as I say, because of the acid rain, it was taken down, and the new one that you see at the present moment, Our Lady of the Dawn Gate, and that was a new glass portrayal it was put into it, that was etched in on glass.
In 1982, the Polish community added a shrine in honour of Our Lady of Czestochowa. One of the highlights of Canon Mullen's time came with the visit of the Polish Cardinal Glemp, who visited the Polish community of Carfin and blessed their recently installed shrine. It was a fitting end to 20 years of dedicated service to the grotto, and 2 weeks after this momentous occasion, he retired to be replaced by Father Brian Logue.
Being appointed to Carfin, I was thoroughly delighted, absolutely. Because it was such a busy place and people were coming from throughout the diocese, the north of England, places like that, you know. Oh yeah. Oh, I loved it very much, I must say. Aye.
Father Logue is a lovely man, a really, really nice man. And as I recall, it was he who really started the process of rejuvenating the grotto. And he had a lot of work done. He had a lot of people brought in to help with the work, and the whole process of, to me it was like reinvigorating the grotto, really started with him.
One of Father Logue's lasting additions to the grotto was the striking glass chapel erected in the lower part of the grounds. Originally featured at the Glasgow Garden Festival of 1988 as a multi-denominational church, Father Logue thought it would be ideal to foster a greater sense of Eucharistic devotion and holy hours in the grotto.
Of course, this was very special, that it was built during my time, the glass chapel, yeah. Well, people were all very delighted with to get this here. It was so very convenient in Mass and everything else, you know. Aye. It's a very prayerful place and devout place, you know, yeah.
At a cost of £12,000, this was secured for the grotto, brought to Carfin and reassembled by volunteers. It was situated on the site of the now remodelled Stella Maris Lake, and the glass chapel was to take the same name. However, following the terrorist bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, it was decided that, in memory of the 270 victims, the chapel would take the name of the doomed plane, the Maid of the Seas. It was blessed by Bishop Devine in June 1989, attended by the parish priest of Lockerbie and members of the local congregation. Very quickly, the glass chapel became a focus for holy hours and devotionals, with an increase in pilgrimages.
Well, my favourite part of the grotto is where we are just now, is the glass chapel. This was a big part of my vocation story. So before going to seminary, I used to work, and before I would go to work, I'd come in here every morning for 35 minutes at 7 a.m. With my dad, God rest him, and we would have adoration, and I would say my prayers and pray that God would guide me through my vocation and if this is what He wanted me to do. And I did that for a year before speaking to anyone about how I was feeling.
Well, it was really a very central place for the diocese, the coming to the grotto. And not only did the people of Motherwell come to the grotto, but people from England came up, coachloads.
The demands of the modern pilgrim clearly demonstrated the need for a contemporary visitor centre at the grotto. This was met in 1996 by the construction of the Pilgrimage Centre, which housed a cafe, a shop and a museum.
The new centre came about, and it was, my understanding is, it was Father Logue who realised that the people, the visitors come to the grotto, didn't have any facilities for comfort, and given our weather and such like, and the distance people had to travel to come, so they wanted to spend time when they came. They didn't want to drop in, say a prayer and back into the train station or into the car and back home. I started as a part-time shop assistant, just, but I thought it's great, because I had been through a very traumatic time at home. We had lost my young nephew and that, and it had taken its toll on me. So it was like a lifesaver for me, because it got me involved with people. It took me away from my own thoughts and that, and then the people you meet the people who would come in and the things they shared with you, you know, the trust they put in you. And I thought that was really amazing, the trust they put in the staff, especially the staff at the shop. You know, they would pour their heart out to you. Suppose it's people, we're all putting a face on for the world and we're carrying our own wee troubles each day, but you put them aside and you go to your work. But if you're going through a really troubled time, especially illness and things like that, and everybody's trying to keep a face on it for each other, then nobody wants to be the one that breaks down and causes the weepies. So we used to get a lot of that. So you were also like a kind of counsellor, you were a listening board for a lot of people.
Father Colin Hughes took over briefly from Father Logue in 1996. He was already a well-known face as he had briefly served as curate under Father Logue in the 1980s. His tenure was a short one, and the grotto was transferred to the care of priests in the Carmelite order. Father Joseph Kelly as parish priest, with Father Andrew Donnelly and Father Frank MacAleese. At this time, a new, more spacious relic chapel was built adjacent to the parish church, which would allow once again the treasures of Canon Taylor's collection to be seen in full. In 2001, a famine memorial was erected by the Irish Shrine, unveiled by the Irish Taoiseach Bertie Ahern, one of the very first public Irish famine memorials in Scotland at that time. Father Thomas Miller became parish priest in 2002, continuing the work done by his predecessors. He was responsible for the construction of the new Xavier Centre in 2008, as well as upgrades to the grotto grounds and the installation, most notably, of a statue of Pope St John Paul II and the renovated Stations of the Cross. In 2009, the Bishop of Tarbes and Lourdes blessed and dedicated the grotto memorial cave. In February 2011, Father Francis McGahey was appointed to Carfin as the then youngest parish priest in the diocese. Father McGahey renovated many areas of the grotto grounds, including the Holy House, the Divine Mercy Chapel, the Lord's Tomb, and the Chapel of the Angels. One of the largest events of his tenure was the 2017 consecration of Scotland, which saw around 6,000 gather to pray for the conversion of Scotland. Not long after this, in 2019, Father McGahey was instrumental in bringing the relics of St Therese to the grotto, where she was so loved.
I heard confessions up in the chapel, in the church, on the Saturday night, and for about an hour, and it was really a wonderful experience, listening to people pouring their souls out, and I remember driving home from that night and saying to myself, "Now, Michael, watch the road." I was on the high. It was a wonderful experience. You would say that here in Confessions, where it was a wonderful experience of people's faith.
The 3 days of the Relics visit to Carfin saw around 20,000 pilgrims pass through the church, culminating in a packed national pilgrimage and farewell to the relics. Sadly, the toll of the work in the grotto impacted Father McGahey's health, and he had to retire from his duties at Carfin at the end of 2019. As a new decade arrived, change too came to Carfin with the appointment of Father James Grant in February 2020.
Boys and girls, mums and dads, teachers, I'm delighted that this, my first Mass here as your new parish priest is with you, boys and girls.
Unfortunately, there was no time for him to settle, as the entire world was rocked by the emergence of the global COVID virus pandemic, which effectively shut down society as people were asked to remain in their homes.
This evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
However, despite this adversity, the place of the grotto in the hearts of the faithful was cemented as Carfin became one of the pioneers of online broadcasting, bringing in hundreds of daily mass viewers.
We had to then look at different ways of streaming mass and services from the grotto, and that meant that lots of people who had maybe only been at the grotto as children were being reacquainted with the grotto through the means of social media, through streaming masses and services in the grotto.
Then, with the stabilising of the pandemic, more people were allowed to venture out of their homes for exercise, and the open spaces of the grotto became an invaluable sanctuary for prayer for those unable to enter church buildings. With the easing of restrictions in early 2021, plans soon followed for the marking of the centenary of Carfin Grotto. With this in mind, Father Grant, eager to continue the legacy of his predecessors, sought to install shrines of modern-day saints such as Padre Pio, St. Gianna Molla and the Blessed Carlo Acutis, as well as renovating the altar at the grotto with the installation of the facade of the old high altar from the time of Canon Taylor.
I also asked the bishops of Scotland if they would consider officially naming the grotto as the National Marian Shrine, and they were very happy to do so, and that was something which Bishop Toll did as the Bishop of the Diocese, and he proclaimed that on behalf of the Scottish Bishops' Conference as the National Marian Shrine in Scotland.
We, the bishops, priests, deacons and lay faithful of Scotland, designate this shrine a national shrine in honour of Our Lady of Lourdes.
Refurbishment works commenced on the pilgrimage centre, which was closed a few years prior due to urgent repair costs. One of the highlights in the immediate post-COVID period occurred on May 31st, 2021, when the grotto linked directly to Rome and the Holy Father Pope Francis in praying for the world along with the other international Marian shrines. This culminated in the release of a 70-foot balloon rosary above the grotto to the delight of all.
Unfortunately, the wire snapped, and so the balloons are drifting somewhere over the west of Scotland.
Fittingly too, the Corpus Christi procession was restored once again in June 2022 through the streets of Newthill and Carfin, with benediction from Bishop Toll, including a Eucharistic exhibition week in the grotto. It was early in 2022 that the grotto received the happy news that, coinciding with the 100-year celebrations, the relics of St. Bernadette would spend an entire week at Carfin Grotto. This week saw over 30,000 pilgrims visit the shrine, including the Vice-Rector of Lourdes and the Primate of all Ireland, Archbishop Eamon Martin.
C'est la première fois ici, dans ce sanctuaire de Carfin. D'abord parce que je suis émerveillé par la foi des pèlerins qui sont venus ici, la foi de ceux qui ont construit ce sanctuaire.
The words that are just above the grotto are very powerful. Behold your mother. Makes me think of the words of Jesus on the cross, where he gave us his mother to be there for us in difficulties and troubles, and goodness knows there are plenty of those these days. So it's been a very special day and I'm honoured to be here.
in emotional scenes on the very last day of the Grotto's 100-year celebrations, large crowds bade farewell to the relics of St Bernadette on the feast of St Therese. A happy coincidence for all acutely aware of the significance of these saints to the Grotto's history. On the 21st of September, to mark officially the centenary of the Grotto, Archbishop Gugerotti, Papal Nuncio to Great Britain, celebrated Mass in St Francis Xavier Church and later processed to the Grotto for prayers by torchlight.
Our Lady of Lourdes, you revealed your name to Bernadette by simply saying, I am the Immaculate Conception. A great experience, you know, it is something unbelievable. The faith of simple people, this is what saves the world.
And so, we look forward to the next 100 years of the Carfin Grotto, giving thanks for the sacrifices of the generations gone before, and with fervent prayer for those yet to come. And we end with the words of Canon Taylor. The future of the Grotto is in her hands, and those of her favourites, St Therese and St Bernadette. If this be of men, it will come to naught. But if it be of God, it will endure. And that motto of Carfin might well be that of Lourdes. Per Mariam ad Jesum. Through Mary to Jesus.
The world has changed tremendously since the Canon opened the grotto in 1922. But there is still, as the relics of St Bernadette proved, there is still, I think, a need for places like Carfin where people can come and just detach themselves from their busy lives and spend some time here and nourishing their spiritual life.
I like the grotto existence. And people was a friend with us. It's nice people. Congratulations on your centenary.
When you see how much the grotto's grown, and it's beautiful, it's well kept, and it looks absolutely fabulous. I'm proud to say that it's Scotland's shrine.
It's going from strength to strength. I'm looking forward to the future as well, to see what holds.
There is a danger that you might take it for granted.
I would hope that parish by parish we would promote it strongly.
I would like to hope that the people in the diocese would visit it more often, you know.
To have such an extensive shrine here, sort of, it's very special, I think. And maybe something like this might grow more, you know, in that sense of just coming together in a more central location and celebrating your faith there.
And this past few months, there's been an awakening and an awareness, and I think too for myself and for other people around the grotto, seeing that new life coming back into the grotto. It's wonderful.
If I've got problems, I can come up here and sit there and think them over and pray and think, and it means a lot. Really, really means a lot.
I would just encourage people to come to Carfin who've not been before. Many people watch things online, they'll like pictures on Facebook, they'll like videos, they'll share videos, and that's lovely, that's wonderful. That is a way of evangelisation, but to actually come in person if you can will change your life, and it'll increase your faith.